Hi, welcome back. In this video, I'm going to show you how to draw this easy peasy hyper realistic eye using graphite pencils. So let's get started. So these are the art supplies I'm going to use for this drawing, and you can pause the video right here to note them down. I'm using this A3 size paper from my ordinary drawing paper pad, and the drawing portion area is 11 x 14 inches. So first of all, I'm going to mask the edges of this paper using a masking tape. It will help you get a straight and sharp border in the end. I drew the outlines using grid method, and you can find the detailed step-by-step process from making the grid to outlining on my Patreon profile. Link is in the description. Okay, so first of all, I'm darkening the directional lines for the pupil and then filling it thoroughly using an 8B pencil. Now for the iris texture, I'm firstly making the outline for the texture near the pupil. I'm adding small strokes of random length to mimic the base of the iris in the reference image. Notice that I'm keeping the angle on the pencil low to achieve light base and to avoid any harsh lines or strokes. Okay, now I'm adding a base layer in the iris using the same 8B pencil. I'm keeping the pressure on my pencil high near the outline and then gradually decreasing it as I move toward the pupil to get this perfect gradient effect. And then for the darker texture near the pupil, I'm adding a small dot and then extending it a little bit towards the pupil. I'm keeping some of the strokes wider and some of them thinner, depending on the area I'm working on by carefully analyzing the reference image. And when you are done with this texture all around the pupil, start adding base layer in the remaining portion with a lighter pressure. Now as the base layer is done, I'm adding darker texture using the same 8B pencil with a low angle to get blended strokes. I'm drawing random shapes, curved strokes and lines to match it with the reference image. Okay, so now I'm blending this layer thoroughly using a medium-sized dry brush in a circular scribbling motion to avoid any patchiness in the shade. Before directly diving into the lighter texture and highlighting process, first pay attention to the intricate patterns and texture, as it is very crucial for achieving realism. And then use your flat tip mono zero eraser and start adding small strokes for the lighter texture. You can create a flat tip of your mono zero eraser by rubbing it vertically on sandpaper. You will get sharp corners all around the tip which are perfect for adding thin highlights. And you also don't need to sharpen the tip again and again. Just rotate the eraser and keep adding this iris texture until all the sharp corners are used. Also make sure to keep these strokes random, as too much uniformity will make the drawing look unrealistic and flat. I'm repeating the similar process and adding such highlights all around the pupil. The iris usually has a U-shaped texture near the pupil, so I'm mimicking it by lightening the area using a perfection eraser. I'm also adding some blended strokes using the same perfection eraser in between and over the previous brighter ones. You can always go back and forth with your tools until you achieve a cohesive look. And by the way, you can get access to our premium content and support this channel through Patreon. You can sign up through different membership levels and get access to all the outline and grid references, etc. We have an ever-growing library of hundreds of exclusive and real-time tutorials. And you will also get access to 4 new tutorials every month. You can also post your artworks in our active community of patrons and participate in our weekly critique sessions where I give my honest and positive critiques on your artworks, so you can improve your skills and get better with your drawing. Visit the link in description and become a premium member today. Okay, so during the highlighting process, some of the contrast and darker texture faded away. So to readjust the darker texture and to further fine-tune the previous ones, I'm using my 8B pencil and carefully shading the required areas. Now by using the same pencil, I'm also darkening the outline of the pupil to give it a pitch black shade. And then adding the reflection of eyelashes in the upper portion of the iris using a sharp tip 8B pencil. I'm keeping the length and direction of these strokes random to give the iris a more natural look. Just like this. Okay, so to make the iris more shiny, it's time to add brighter highlights, and I'm using my electric eraser for this purpose. I'm firstly sharpening the tip of my electric eraser by rubbing it on a scraper like this. You can also use any rough surface or sandpaper if you don't have this scraper. Now I'm adding these intricate highlights in between and over the previous ones. It will immediately make the iris look more shiny and realistic. And for the final touches in the iris, I'm going back and forth with my eraser to achieve desired results. Moving on to this sclera, and I'm adding a base layer using an HB graphite powder with a medium sized dry brush. I'm using circular scribbling motion while adding this layer to avoid harsh strokes and patchiness. If you don't have a graphite powder kit, you can make one at home by watching this video from the cards. As the rough base is done, I'm blending it thoroughly using tissue paper to achieve smoothness. Let's add some shadows and contrast in this sclera using a 2B graphite pencil, and then blending it with a brush first and further fine-tuning it with a tissue paper later on. You can go back and forth with your tools to further fine-tune these details. Now I'm using my HB graphite powder and adding a base layer in the upper eyelid thoroughly using a bigger size dry brush. I'm keeping the pressure on my brush variable to achieve lighter and darker tones as required. Now as the base layer is done, I'm adding depth to the eye fold by layering the same HB graphite powder with a medium sized dry brush. Notice that I'm maintaining the higher pressure on my brush to achieve a darker layer. Okay, so firstly I'm blending these layers using a bigger size dry brush and then going over them again with a tissue paper to achieve smoother results. Okay, now moving on to the skin texture, and first of all I'm adding a base layer of lighter texture using a perfection eraser. On this top left side there is a peach fuzz, and to create such texture of very thin and lighter hair, I'm gradually flicking my pencil and adding small thin strokes. I'm also keeping the distance and direction of these strokes random, while keeping the natural flow of hair in mind to achieve a more realistic looking texture. Some of the areas are blurry, so to create a blurry texture, I'm using my kneaded eraser and carefully picking up the excess graphite to achieve desired texture. Just make a very thin end by kneading it carefully like the texture you want and then dab it on the required areas. It will pick up the graphite and imprint a texture on the paper, just like the shape of the tip you have created earlier, just like this. Okay, so let's add thin and sharp hair texture using a Mono 0 razor. And first of all, I'm creating a flat tip by rubbing it vertically on a sandpaper like this. As I said earlier, rubbing vertically will create sharp corners all around the tip, which will save a lot of your time and energy. Notice that I'm adding very small and random strokes, mainly focusing on the eye fold portion to create a 3D texture. And I'm going back and forth with my tools to give final touches to the skin texture in the required portions. Okay, so for the lower portion on the upper eyelid, I'm firstly adding darker strokes using my B pencil. And as I move toward the right side, I'm making these strokes look more blended instead of sharp to achieve this blurry effect. Now it's time to add a lighter texture, and for that, I'm firstly using my sharp tip perfection eraser and adding random strokes in between the previous darker ones. I'm using a perfection eraser for the center portion of the eyelid only, as this area is blurry in the reference image. And for the left focused portion, I'm switching towards the sharp tip Mono 0 eraser and adding thin and intricate strokes just like the way I did using the perfection eraser. And then to lighten some of this excessive graphite, I'm using my perfection eraser and going over all these areas on which I need highlights. Again, you can go back and forth with your erasers to achieve desired results. Okay, so for the right portion of the eyelid, the texture here is a little bit different from the left side. So I'm adding a small dot first using a perfection eraser and then extending it a little bit in all the directions. And I'm going to repeat the similar process and adding such texture on this right side as well. And then further fine tuning and blending it by dabbing a kneaded eraser over the previously added highlights. Okay, so now it's time to add eyelashes, and when we look at the reference image, only the lashes on the left side are in focus. The rest of them are blurry. So I'm adding these strokes for the eyelashes in the left area first using an 8B graphite pencil. Make sure to notice the length, thickness and direction of the lashes before adding them. Many beginners often make the mistake of adding lashes that are of same length and are parallel to each other, which doesn't give the eye a very good and realistic look. Also, it is not necessary to copy the exact way I'm adding these lashes, but you can achieve similar results by changing the length and thickness of the lashes and adding these strokes randomly. Start at the root of the lashes and gradually flick your pencil towards the tip, keeping the direction of the lashes in mind. This method helps the lashes look more connected and gives them a fuller look. Now for the blurry lashes, I'm keeping the angle on my pencil very low to achieve a blended stroke. Also notice the tip of my pencil is not very sharp. Instead, it is rounded to achieve thicker eyelashes. Okay, now I'm using my small dry brush to blend the ends of the lashes as well as to create a blurry look by subtly going over the whole lash stroke, just like this. Moving on to the center ones, and firstly I'm adding some direction lines using a 2B pencil with low angle, and then adding darker strokes using an 8B pencil with the same rounded tip. I'm blending these strokes using dry brush by carefully flicking my brush to create a 3D blended texture. Make sure not to overblend these strokes as it will make the overall lashes look dull and unrealistic. I'm repeating the similar process of adding and blending the eyelashes for the remaining portion. As the darker hair strokes are done, it's time to add highlights, and I'm using a sharp and clean tip perfection eraser to add these strokes only where we need lighter highlights. And for the brighter ones, I'm using my flat tip Mono Zero eraser and adding curved strokes right beside the darker ones to make them look more shiny and 3D. I'm using my perfection eraser again to further fine tune the highlights in between the lashes. For the tear duct area, I'm adding softer highlights first, and then using the same eraser to add lighter hair strokes near the inner corner of the eye later on. Then I'm using my electric razor and adding these brighter highlights in the tear duct area. It will immediately make it look more shiny and watery. Okay, so moving on to the lower eyelid, and as always, I'm darkening the directional lines for the lower lashes using my 8B graphite pencil. And then by using an HB graphite powder, I'm adding a base layer using a bigger size dry brush and filling the whole area thoroughly. Now I'm blending this layer thoroughly using a soft tissue paper to create a smooth base. As the base layer is done, let's fine tune and add darker details using a B graphite pencil. I'm focusing on the waterline as well as the wrinkles under the eye and then blending this layer thoroughly using a dry brush later on. Okay, so let's move on to the texturing process, and as this area has a blended and soft texture, so I'm using my kneaded eraser for this purpose. Kneaded eraser will pick up all the excessive graphite from the areas it will touch, leaving you with a beautifully blended texture, just like this. Okay, so now for the area on the left side, I'm using my sharp tip perfection eraser and adding these slant and thin strokes. Now to further fine tune them, I'm using my flat tip Mono Zero eraser and adding strokes in between and over the previous ones I just added. And then I'm again using my kneaded eraser and blending the edges of the highlights I just added to give them a softer look. I'm also using the same kneaded eraser to add lighter texture on the left side as well. Okay, so as the texture is done, let's move on to the eyelashes. And I'm repeating the exact technique and process as I did for the upper eyelashes. But keep in mind that the lower lashes are relatively smaller and less denser than the upper lashes. Now to make the waterline look more shiny and watery, I'm adding these small dots and strokes using my Mono Zero eraser, mainly focusing near the iris. And then to fine tune and to make some of the highlights pop up a little bit more, I'm using my sharp tip electric razor and going over the previous highlights. Now I'm using my perfection eraser to add subtle highlights and texture on this waterline. For the final touches in the drawing, I'm going back and forth with my tools to achieve the desired look. And with this last step, we are done with this super quick and easy eye drawing. It takes so much time and efforts to create this tutorial, so please leave a like if you enjoyed this one. It helps me a lot as an artist. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.